The morning started quietly for Lena. She had no special plans, no reason to rush anywhere. It was her one day off after working 6 long night shifts at the small clinic near the edge of town. Her apartment was silent, the kind of silence that comes after days of exhaustion. The air smelled faintly of instant coffee and the lavender candle she had burned the night before. She had planned to do laundry, maybe buy groceries and rest her aching back. By late morning, she decided to take a drive. Sometimes she found peace in the road, the hum of the engine, the sight of trees rushing past, the brief escape from everything that had gone wrong in her life. The sky was pale blue, the kind of day that makes you think nothing bad can happen. She rolled down her window, feeling the breeze lift her hair, and turned on the radio. For the first time in weeks, she caught herself humming along. Lena had been through a rough patch lately. The clinic where she worked was cutting hours, and rent had gone up again. She was living month to month, saving every bit she could and trying not to lose hope. Her mother often told her, "Good things find good people." But lately, Lena had begun to doubt it. Still, she carried on quietly, helping others at work, smiling even when her eyes showed the tiredness she felt inside. She took the long route home that day, a road that curved through quiet countryside before joining the highway. The trees stood tall on both sides, their shadows dancing on the asphalt. There wasn't much traffic, just a few cars scattered in the distance. She sipped from her coffee cup, thinking about her next paycheck, when suddenly something ahead caught her attention. At first, she thought it was just smoke from someone burning leaves, but as she got closer, her stomach tightened. It wasn't a small fire. It was a car, crashed into a tree on the opposite side of the road, flames starting to rise from the hood. Her hands froze on the steering wheel. She looked around, and there was no one else nearby. Without thinking, she hit her hazard lights, pulled over, and jumped out. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. The heat from the fire hit her face as she ran closer. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The front of the SUV was crushed, the windshield shattered, smoke curling upward in thick black waves. "Hello? Is anyone inside?" She shouted, coughing as the smoke burned her throat. From inside the vehicle, she heard a faint sound. Not a man's voice, not an adult's cry. It was high-pitched, weak, frightened. Her heart sank. It was a child. Lena ran to the passenger side, tugging at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The metal was twisted and jammed. She ran around to the other side, tried again, and the heat made her pull her hand back. The paint was already blistering. She could see through the window now, and a little boy in a car seat crying, his face streaked with tears and soot. "Hold on, sweetheart. I'm here," she shouted, though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. Her mind raced. She had seen crashes before, but never one with fire spreading this fast. She grabbed her jacket from the ground, wrapped it around her hands, and yanked on the handle again. Still stuck. Her heart raced faster. She looked around, desperate for something heavy. On the ground a few meters away, she spotted a metal rod, maybe part of the car's bumper that had come loose. She picked it up, took a deep breath, and smashed it against the side window. The first hit only cracked it. The second sent glass scattering everywhere. Smoke rushed out through the opening, and she coughed, covering her mouth. The little boy's eyes were wide, his cries turning into sharp gasps. He couldn't have been older than 3. Lena reached through the broken window, trying not to cut herself, and unbuckled his seatbelt. It was stiff, jammed at first, and for a second she thought she wouldn't be able to release it. But it clicked loose, and she pulled him toward her. "Come on, sweetheart, we're getting out," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to comfort him. The air around them was getting hotter. Flames licked the front of the car now, spreading under the seats. Lena pulled the child through the window, holding him tightly against her chest as she backed away. Just a few feet, she told herself. Just a few more feet. She stumbled on the gravel, nearly losing balance, but held on to him. Her ears rang with the roar of the fire. And then, a loud pop. The sound of something bursting inside the car. She turned her back to shield the boy, crouching low as heat rushed past her. When she opened her eyes again, she was several feet away, lying on the grass, the boy still clinging to her. The car was engulfed now, flames roaring high into the air. "Shh, it's okay. You're safe now," she whispered, brushing the boy's hair away from his forehead. He was shaking uncontrollably, his tiny hands clutching her shirt. The sound of sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Someone must have called for help. Lena sat there on the side of the road, holding him tightly, tears stinging her eyes, part relief, part shock. She could still feel the heat on her skin, her palms burning from where the metal had touched her. Minutes later, a car screeched to a stop nearby, a sleek black sedan. A man in a suit jumped out, his face pale and terrified. He ran toward them so fast that Lena barely had time to speak. "My son," he cried, dropping to his knees beside her. He took the boy from her arms, checking him from head to toe, his hands shaking. The child reached for him, mumbling something through his tears. The man pulled him close, his voice breaking. Lena watched silently, breathing hard, her body trembling from the adrenaline. She could see the fear and relief mixing on his face, the kind of emotion that words can't describe. One of the passing drivers who had stopped nearby walked over and said, "She pulled him out." The car was already on fire. The man looked up at her, disbelief written all over his face. You went in there?" Lena nodded weakly. He was crying. "I couldn't just leave him." He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes glistening. "You saved my son's life." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Before she could reply, the fire truck arrived, sirens blaring. Firefighters rushed toward the burning car, spraying foam and shouting commands. A police officer came over, helping Lena to her feet. "Are you okay, ma'am? Any injuries?" She shook her head. Just a few burns on my hands." "I'm fine." The officer guided her toward an ambulance that had just arrived. The man followed close behind, carrying his son, who was now calmer, his small hand clutching his father's shirt. Inside the ambulance, a paramedic checked Lena's pulse and examined her palms. The skin was red and tender, but not severely burned. "You were lucky," he said gently. "That car could have gone up at any second." Lena nodded, still processing everything. She looked over at the boy sitting on the stretcher beside her. He was staring at her quietly now, his big brown eyes soft and curious. She smiled at him and he reached out his tiny hand. She took it without thinking. "Thank you," his father said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "If you hadn't stopped—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "It's okay," she interrupted quietly. "He's safe. That's all that matters." He sat down across from her, still holding his son. "You have no idea what you've done for me," he said. "I thought I lost him." The paramedics tended to them during the ride to the hospital. Lena tried to stay calm, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Everything replayed in her mind. The smoke, the child's cry, the moment the car exploded. It didn't feel real yet. At the hospital, the staff rushed to check the boy for smoke inhalation. He was shaken but unharmed. His father stayed close to him, barely letting go. Lena sat in the hallway, her hands wrapped in cool bandages, staring blankly at the floor. After what felt like hours, the man returned. He looked different now, calmer but still overwhelmed. "They said he'll be fine," he told her. "Thanks to you." Lena smiled faintly. "That's good news." He paused, studying her face. "You risked your life for a child you didn't even know. Most people would have just called for help and stayed back." "I didn't think," she admitted. "I just saw him there and I couldn't walk away." He nodded slowly, still looking at her with that mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly. "You saved the most important person in my life." Lena didn't know what to say. She just looked away, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure how to respond to such words. Later, as she stepped outside the hospital, the evening sky was painted with shades of orange and gold. The world felt strangely still after the chaos of the day. Her car was still parked miles away on that quiet road, probably surrounded by police tape now. But none of that mattered. For a brief moment, she stood there breathing in the cool air, realizing how close she had come to disaster, and how, somehow, she had walked away with her life and the life of a small child in her arms. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. That single act of courage, born out of instinct and kindness, would soon pull her into a world she never imagined, a world far from her small apartment and long work nights. But for now, she was just Lena, a tired nurse who had done what her heart told her was right. And as she walked down the hospital steps, her palms still wrapped in bandages, she whispered softly to herself, "Maybe Mom was right. Maybe good things really do find good people." The next morning, Lena woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating nonstop on the bedside table. Her body ached, and her hands still burned slightly under the bandages. She squinted at the screen and saw dozens of missed calls and messages from co-workers, friends, and even her landlord. Confused, she opened one of the texts. It was a link to a news article. The headline made her freeze. Nurse risks her life to save toddler from burning SUV outside Oak Ridge Highway. Her photo was right below it, taken at the hospital, her hair messy, bandaged hands resting on her lap. The picture captured her dazed expression, somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. She scrolled down and saw the comments. People were calling her brave, selfless, a real-life hero. Some had even found her social media and were posting messages of thanks. She wasn't used to attention like this. She preferred quiet days, small smiles, and staying invisible. But now the world seemed to know her name. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Ms. Lena Carter. The voice on the other end was deep and calm, the kind that carried authority. This is Daniel Sterling, she paused. The name sounded familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. Then she remembered the man from yesterday, the one who had held his son in tears by the side of the road. Oh, she said softly. Yeah, hello. I hope I'm not calling too early, he said. I just wanted to thank you again. Leo is doing well. He asked about you this morning. Her heart softened. I'm glad he's okay. That's all that matters. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, I was wondering if you'd allow me to meet you. I know you've been through a lot, but I'd really like to thank you in person. She hesitated, unsure. The last thing she wanted was attention or praise. But his tone wasn't demanding. It was gentle, almost pleading. All right, she finally said, but just for a few minutes. He offered to pick her up, but she politely refused. Instead, they agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near the hospital later that afternoon. When Lena arrived, she wore simple clothes, jeans, a white shirt, and her hair tied back. She felt nervous, wondering what to say. At a corner table sat the man from the crash, now dressed in a dark suit. He stood up as soon as he saw her. Lena, he said, reaching out to shake her hand gently. I'm so glad you came. Up close, he looked different from how she remembered. Calmer, but still with that air of someone used to being in control. His eyes, though, carried warmth. I just wanted to see how you were, he continued, and to tell you again how grateful I am. You saved my entire world yesterday. You don't have to thank me, she replied softly. Anyone would have done the same. He smiled faintly. No, not anyone. Most people would have waited for help. You didn't. You ran into a burning car for a child you'd never met. That's not something ordinary people do. Lena lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the praise. I didn't think about it. I just saw him there. I couldn't let him die. They talked for a while. He told her about his son, how Leo had lost his mother 2 years ago in a sudden illness, how he had been raising him alone while trying to manage his company. The accident had shaken him to his core. When she spoke, Daniel listened quietly, asking questions about her work at the clinic, her life in the small apartment, and the long hours she worked. There was no pity in his eyes, just genuine curiosity. Before they parted, he said, Lena, I'd like to do something for you. I know nothing I say can equal what you did, but please let me help you somehow. She smiled politely. You already did. Seeing Leo safe is more than enough for me. But he didn't forget that conversation. The following week, Lena returned to work at the clinic. Her co-workers greeted her with cheers and smiles, some even bringing small gifts. But beneath the excitement, she felt uneasy about the sudden attention. Patients recognized her from the news, wanting to shake her hand or take photos. It all felt strange. She wasn't someone who liked being in the spotlight. One evening, as she was leaving work, she found Daniel waiting outside near his car. He stepped forward, looking slightly unsure, as if he wasn't sure whether she'd welcome the sight of him. Hi, he said, his voice kind but a little hesitant. I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to talk for a minute. Lena blinked in surprise. You found my workplace. He smiled. It wasn't hard. The story mentioned the clinic. I promise I'm not here to bother you. I just wanted to ask you something. She crossed her arms lightly, curious. What is it? I've been thinking, he said slowly, choosing his words. Leo still wakes up crying at night. He keeps asking for you. He doesn't feel safe around anyone else yet. He paused, his expression sincere. Would you consider spending some time with him? Just until he settles again. I can arrange everything properly, whatever you're comfortable with. She hesitated. You mean like babysitting? Not exactly, he said. More like helping him adjust. You have this calm way about you. He trusts you. And honestly, his voice softened. I do too. Lena didn't know what to say. It wasn't a small request. Working at the clinic was already tiring, and spending time at a rich man's estate felt far removed from her simple life. But when she remembered Leo's frightened little face in that burning car, her heart ached. I can try, she finally said, for a few days at least. The next afternoon, Daniel sent a driver to pick her up. The car drove through wide streets lined with tall trees until they reached an iron gate that opened into a large property. The house beyond it looked like something from a magazine, elegant, modern, and peaceful. As she stepped inside, she felt out of place. Everything gleamed, the polished floors, the white walls, the quiet hum of distant music. But then a small voice broke the silence. Lena! She turned to see Leo running toward her, his tiny arms outstretched. He crashed into her legs, hugging her tightly. She knelt down and hugged him back, feeling his little heart beat against her. Daniel stood nearby, smiling quietly. That's the first time he's smiled in days, he said softly. They spent the afternoon together in the garden. Lena helped Leo stack wooden blocks, chased him around the yard, and watched as he giggled again for the first time since the accident. When she looked up, she caught Daniel watching from the porch, not saying a word, just observing with a faint, grateful smile. As the sun began to set, he walked over. He looks happy, he said. He's a strong boy, she replied. He just needs time, he nodded. You've given him more peace in one day than weeks of therapy ever did. She laughed gently. I think he just needed someone to play with. Daniel looked at her then, not as the powerful businessman everyone in the city knew, but as a father, tired, vulnerable, grateful. You have no idea what this means to me, he said quietly. When that car caught fire, I thought my world ended. And now, seeing him laugh again, he trailed off, emotion catching in his voice. Lena smiled, trying to lighten the moment. Well, you two are doing just fine. You just needed a little push. Before she left that evening, Daniel walked her to the gate. Lena, he said suddenly, I'd like to make this more official. If you're open to it, I'd like to offer you a position. Not just to visit, but to stay for a while as Leo's personal caregiver. She blinked in surprise. You mean live here? Yes, you'd have your own space, full freedom, and I'll make sure it's worth your time. But more than that, Leo needs stability, and he seems to have found that in you. Lena hesitated. It was too sudden, too big. She barely knew this man beyond one tragic day. But something in his eyes told her this wasn't just about help. It was about trust, something rare and fragile. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Of course, he replied, smiling softly. Take all the time you need. That night, as she sat in her small apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The way Leo had laughed, the way Daniel had looked at his son, the feeling of warmth that filled the house. It was all still fresh in her mind. Her own life felt small and uncertain by comparison. By morning, her decision was clear. Maybe this was her chance, not for money or comfort, but for something meaningful again. When she called Daniel later that day, she said simply, I'll take the job. There was silence for a second, then a quiet sigh of relief on the other end. Thank you, Lena, you won't regret this. As she hung up, she looked around her apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the cracked mirror, the half-empty coffee mug on the counter, and felt a strange peace settle in her chest. She didn't know what awaited her in that big house, or how deeply this new chapter would change her life. But she knew one thing for certain. Her choice to stop on that quiet road had not only saved a child, it had set her own life on a new path. And this time, for the first time in years, she felt that maybe the future was smiling back at her. When Lena moved into the Sterling estate, it felt like stepping into another world. Everything was quiet, perfectly arranged, and shining with order. The tall windows looked out over wide gardens filled with roses, fountains, and paths that seemed to go on forever. The air even smelled different, clean and sweet, touched by the faint scent of blooming jasmine. The guest house Daniel had arranged for her was more beautiful than any place she had ever lived. It had a small kitchen, a soft bed, and big glass doors that opened to the garden. Still, despite the beauty, she felt nervous. It wasn't her world, not yet. She was just a nurse from a small clinic, surrounded now by people in uniforms who spoke softly and carried trays of silver dishes. On her first morning, she woke up early to the sound of birds. She walked to the main house, her shoes crunching on the gravel path. A housekeeper named Laura greeted her kindly, and led her to the family room where Leo was sitting on the floor, building something with colorful blocks. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. "Lena," he shouted, jumping up and running into her arms. His laugh filled the room, warm and full of life. Daniel stood nearby, dressed for work in a crisp suit, holding a cup of coffee. He smiled when he saw them. "Looks like someone's day just got better." Lena smiled back. "We've got a builder here," she said, nodding at the blocks. "He's been waiting since breakfast," Daniel said. Then, lowering his voice slightly, he added, "I think he's been happier since you came." That simple sentence stayed with her all day. She spent the morning playing with Leo, helping him draw pictures, telling him stories, and laughing at his silly jokes. Sometimes he would go quiet and look at her as if trying to make sure she was real, that she wasn't going to disappear. It broke her heart a little, the way he held onto her sleeve every time she tried to stand up. By the afternoon, when Daniel came home for lunch, the boy was already sitting on the floor, clutching one of Lena's hands and showing her his latest drawing, a messy picture of 3 people holding hands under a sun. "That's me. That's you," he said, pointing to himself and her. "And that's Daddy." Daniel looked at the drawing for a long moment, his eyes soft. Then he smiled, a little sadly. "It's perfect, buddy." After lunch, Daniel asked Lena if she could join him for a quick walk around the garden while Leo napped. He led her down a stone path lined with trimmed hedges and blooming flowers. The sun fell gently over the trees. "I wanted to thank you again," he said quietly. "You've brought something back into this house that's been missing for a long time." Lena glanced at him. "You mean laughter?" He smiled faintly. "Exactly that. Ever since my wife passed away, this place felt empty. I tried to fill it with work, with routines, but it never worked. Leo needed warmth and I didn't know how to give it anymore." She listened, her steps slow beside his. She could hear the honesty in his voice. There was no arrogance in him here, just a man trying to do right by his son. "Sometimes," she said softly, "children don't need everything to be perfect. They just need to feel safe. You've already given him that." He looked at her with quiet gratitude. "You seem to understand him better than anyone, including me." Lena smiled shyly, not knowing what to say. She wasn't used to people noticing her like that. She had spent most of her life helping others quietly, staying in the background. The days that followed slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm. Every morning Leo would run to her door, dragging a toy or a book in his hands. They would eat breakfast together, sometimes with Daniel if he wasn't at a meeting, and then spend the day playing, reading, or walking in the garden. Lena found herself growing attached not just to Leo but to the calm of this new life. There was no constant noise, no worry about unpaid bills, no feeling of running from one shift to another. It felt strange to finally breathe without pressure, but there was another feeling too, something she tried not to think about. Sometimes when she caught Daniel watching her and Leo from across the room, something warm stirred in her chest. She would brush it off quickly, telling herself it was just gratitude, just a shared sense of care for the boy. But deep down she knew it was more than that. One evening a storm rolled in. The wind howled outside and rain beat against the windows. The house was quiet except for the sound of thunder in the distance. Lena was in the living room, reading a bedtime story to Leo. Halfway through the story, the lights flickered and went out. Leo gasped, clutching her arm. "It's dark." She laughed softly. "It's okay, sweetheart. The lights will come back soon." She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The soft white glow filled the room and she made silly shadow animals on the wall. Leo giggled, forgetting his fear. A few minutes later, Daniel walked in with a small lantern. "You two all right?" "We're surviving," she said, smiling. "He's teaching me about bravery." Daniel chuckled and set the lantern on the table. "Looks like you're teaching him more than that." When the storm finally calmed, Leo had fallen asleep on the couch, his small head resting on her lap. Lena stroked his hair gently, lost in thought. Daniel sat across from her, his voice quiet. "You're good with him. Better than anyone I've hired before. He doesn't just listen to you, he trusts you." "He's a wonderful kid," she said softly. "He just needed a little love. We all do." For a while they just sat there, listening to the rain. Then Daniel said something that caught her by surprise. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another brave stranger. But the more I see you with him, the more I realize you've changed both our lives." Lena looked down, unsure how to respond. Compliments always made her uneasy. I didn't do anything special, she said. I just care. And that, he said quietly, is what makes you special. His words lingered in her mind long after he left the room. Over the next few weeks, she grew even closer to Leo. He would run to her after every nap, hold her hand when walking, and call her name when she was out of sight for too long. Daniel often joined them during dinner now, talking more, laughing more. The air around the house began to feel lighter, warmer. One afternoon, Lena found herself sitting by the lake on the edge of the property, watching the water ripple in the breeze. Daniel joined her with 2 cups of tea. Do you ever miss your old life? He asked. She smiled faintly. Sometimes, but I don't miss the struggle. I was always tired, always worried about what might go wrong next. Here, it's peaceful. I'm glad, he said. You deserve peace. They talked for a long time that day, not just about work or life, but about dreams, regrets, and small things that made them laugh. Daniel shared stories about his childhood, and Lena told him about her mother, who had taught her to always help people even when no one noticed. By the time they realized how much time had passed, the sun was dipping behind the trees, painting the sky with gold and pink. That evening, as Lena walked back to her guest house, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet awareness that her life was changing in ways she hadn't planned. The next morning, when she came down for breakfast, Daniel's sister was visiting. She was elegant with sharp eyes and a polite smile. So you're the nurse, she said, her tone friendly but curious. The one everyone's talking about. Lena smiled politely. I guess so. She's not just a nurse, Daniel said, glancing at his sister. She's part of this family now. His words made Lena's heart skip. His sister looked surprised but didn't say anything more. Later that day, Lena found herself thinking about those words again, part of this family. It was strange how life could change in just a few weeks. A month ago, she was living alone, struggling to make ends meet. Now, she was in a beautiful home, caring for a child who adored her, and sharing quiet conversations with a man whose kindness ran deeper than she had expected. That night, as she tucked Leo into bed, he looked up at her sleepily and said, Lena, are you going to stay here forever? She smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. As long as you want me to. He yawned and whispered, Then I hope it's forever. As she turned off the light and walked out of the room, she felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sadness, but from something warm and full that she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. She didn't know what the future would bring, but in that moment, standing in the quiet hallway of the house that once felt so distant, she realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes, life doesn't give second chances. It gives new beginnings disguised as miracles, and hers had started the day she stopped her car on that quiet road and heard a child's cry through the smoke. Daniel had not been able to stop thinking about her. Weeks had passed since the day she saved his little boy, yet her face often came to his mind when he least expected it. When he tucked Leo into bed, when he looked out his office window at the skyline, even when he sat in meetings that once used to hold his full attention, something about her presence had left a quiet mark on his life. Emily, on the other hand, was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Her days felt calmer now, but not exactly normal. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night hearing the echo of sirens from that day, the sound of breaking glass, or the small cry of the boy she pulled from the car. Yet even with those memories, there was a strange peace inside her, because that moment had reminded her that courage still lived somewhere within her, even after all she had lost. Her life after the accident had been simple. The hospital had covered her bills, and Daniel had quietly made sure she was looked after, though he never said how. A few journalists had tried to reach her for interviews, but she didn't want attention. She just wanted her quiet life back, maybe a chance to start again somewhere new. But starting over is never easy when you have nowhere to go. One morning, she received a call for a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was polite and formal, asking if she could visit the Sterling office in the city. She hesitated at first, unsure if she should go, but curiosity and gratitude made her agree. She wanted to thank Daniel in person again for helping her after the hospital. That afternoon, she dressed neatly but simply, an old light blue dress she had kept for special days, and took a bus into the city. When she arrived at the tall glass building that carried Daniel's name on the front, she almost turned around. The building was enormous, the kind that made ordinary people feel small. She stood at the entrance for a moment, unsure if she belonged there, until a woman from the reception smiled and led her to the elevator. When the doors opened at the top floor, Daniel was already waiting. He greeted her warmly, looking less like the powerful businessman everyone saw on TV and more like a father, calm, gentle, and grateful. He asked her to sit, and for a few minutes, they talked about simple things, how she was feeling, how Leo was doing, how life had changed since the accident. "Leo asks about you almost every day," Daniel said with a quiet smile. "He tells everyone you're his hero," Emily laughed softly. "He's just a little boy. I think he's already stronger than I am." Daniel looked at her for a moment as if measuring his words carefully. "You know," he said, leaning slightly forward, "I've been thinking for a long time about how I could thank you properly. But every time I thought of something, money, gifts, anything, it felt wrong. It didn't feel like what you deserved." She blinked, unsure what he meant. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "I just did what anyone should have done." He smiled sadly. "You'd be surprised how few people would have done what you did. You risked your life for my son, a stranger's child. That's not something I can forget." The room went quiet for a moment. Through the large glass window, the city stretched far below, full of movement and light. Daniel stood, walked toward the window, then turned back to her. "I want to offer you something," he said finally. "Not as payment, but as an opportunity. Leo has been struggling since the accident. He's afraid of cars, loud noises, even shadows sometimes. I've hired the best therapists, but he doesn't open up to anyone." "Except you?" Emily frowned slightly. "Me?" Daniel nodded. "You're the one he trusts. When he sees you, he smiles. He sleeps better after talking about you. He calls you his guardian angel. I need someone to stay with him for a while, to help him heal, to make him feel safe again." She was silent for a few moments. The offer touched her deeply, but it also scared her. "You mean, you want me to work for you?" "Yes," he said simply. "I'd like to hire you as Leo's personal nurse and companion. You'd live close by, have everything you need. It's not charity, Emily. It's because I believe you can help him in a way no one else can." Emily felt her throat tighten. Part of her wanted to say yes right away. It sounded like a miracle, a chance to start again. But another part of her hesitated. She had lived most of her life avoiding people with power, afraid of being used or forgotten once her purpose was done. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," she said after a long pause. "I'm not a therapist. I don't know how to help a child like that." Daniel sat down again, his tone gentle. "You helped him when no one else could. That's enough for me." There was something in his voice, a quiet sincerity, that made her believe him. Still, she asked for a little time to think. He agreed instantly, telling her there was no rush. That evening, when she walked out of the tall building, the city lights shimmered around her. She sat on a bench near the bus stop and took a deep breath. The idea of stepping into Daniel's world felt like stepping into another universe, one where people wore suits that cost more than her monthly rent, where cars gleamed and doors opened automatically. But behind all that, she'd seen the same thing she'd seen in every hospital room, a father trying to protect his child. Maybe that was all that mattered. 2 days later, she called him back. "I'll do it," she said simply. The next week, she moved into a small guest house at the back of Daniel's estate. It was cozy, with white curtains, wooden floors, and a small garden outside the window. The main house stood a short walk away, a beautiful old place with tall windows and green lawns where Leo liked to play. When she saw Leo again for the first time since the hospital, he ran to her without hesitation, throwing his small arms around her waist. His laughter was brighter than she remembered. That moment alone made her feel she had made the right choice. From then on, her days followed a gentle rhythm. She spent mornings with Leo, helping him draw, telling stories, or walking with him in the garden. Sometimes he would stop suddenly and ask about the fire, not in fear but in curiosity. Emily would hold his hand and remind him how brave he had been, how he had made it through something very scary. At first, Daniel stayed distant, watching from afar as he juggled his business meetings. But over time, he began joining them, at breakfast, in the garden, or while reading bedtime stories. Slowly, a quiet friendship grew between him and Emily. They talked about life, about loss, about how strange it was that a single moment could bring two completely different worlds together. One evening, After Leo had fallen asleep, Daniel walked Emily to the guest house. The air was cool, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the garden. "You've changed this house," he said quietly. "It feels alive again." Leo laughs more. "Even I think I forgot what peace felt like." Emily smiled softly. "It's not me, it's him. He's healing." "Children are stronger than we think," he shook his head. "You underestimate your effect on people." She looked away, feeling her cheeks warm. "I'm just doing what feels right." "That's exactly why it works," he said. In the following weeks, their lives intertwined naturally. Emily never acted like she belonged in Daniel's wealthy circle, and he never made her feel out of place. He admired her humility and the way she treated everyone the same, from the gardeners to his board members. She reminded him of something he had lost years ago, the ability to care without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, Daniel's mother visited the estate. A graceful older woman with kind eyes, she quickly noticed the way Daniel's voice softened when he spoke to Emily. "Over tea?" She pulled her son aside and whispered, "She's the reason you're smiling again, isn't she?" Daniel didn't answer, but his silence said enough. By then, Emily had started to feel at home in a way she hadn't felt for years. She still carried the same modest heart, but now her days had meaning. She woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, to make Leo laugh, to help him feel safe, to bring warmth into the house. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, she would sit by her window, watching the stars. Sometimes she thought about how a single choice, to stop on that road, to run toward a burning car, had changed everything. Maybe, she thought, life has a strange way of guiding us where we need to be. And somewhere inside that quiet thought, she began to understand what Daniel meant when he said he wanted to offer her a new beginning. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance to heal, not just Leo, not just Daniel, but herself too. That night, as the house slept peacefully and the moonlight touched the garden, she whispered a quiet thank you to the universe for the second chance she didn't know she needed. Months had passed since Emily began living at Daniel's estate, and life had slowly taken on a soft, peaceful rhythm. The seasons were changing now. The trees around the garden were dressed in shades of gold and red, and the air carried the quiet promise of something new. Every morning, the sound of laughter echoed from the backyard where Leo played, his fears slowly fading away, replaced by the carefree joy of a child rediscovering the world. Emily often watched him from the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Sometimes she still couldn't believe how much had changed. A year ago, she had been living in a small rented room, struggling to pay her bills, trying to find meaning in her days. Now, she was surrounded by warmth, by purpose, by people who cared for her, not because she had saved a life, but because she had become part of one. Daniel's home no longer felt like an estate. It felt like a place where hearts were learning to heal. He had become more present, spending evenings reading to his son, taking long walks with Emily and Leo after work, and sharing quiet dinners under the soft lights of the patio. The walls that once seemed cold and distant now held laughter and gentle conversation. One evening, as the sun began to set, Daniel found Emily sitting near the pond at the edge of the garden. The golden light shimmered on the water, and she looked lost in thought. He sat beside her, their silence comfortable and familiar. "You've changed everything here," he said softly. "This place used to feel like a house. Now it feels like home." She smiled, her eyes still fixed on the water. "Maybe it was always a home," she said. "It just needed a little noise, a few smiles." He laughed quietly. "I think it needed you." She turned toward him, her expression calm but warm. "You give me too much credit." He shook his head gently. "No, I don't think I do. You've given my son something I couldn't, a sense of safety. You've given me something too." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "Hope," he said simply. There was a stillness between them then, not awkward but full of unspoken understanding. Emily looked away, pretending to focus on the ripples in the pond. "Sometimes I think about that day," she said softly. "The accident, the fire. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped." Daniel's voice was low. "Then I wouldn't have my son. And maybe I wouldn't have found the strength to live differently." Her eyes glistened slightly and she gave a faint smile. "It's strange, isn't it? How one moment can change everything." He nodded. "Yes, it's like life gives us tiny doors. We don't even know we're standing in front of one until we walk through it. A gentle breeze passed between them, carrying the smell of grass and fading flowers. They sat there until the light faded completely, and the garden was washed in moonlight. Days turned into weeks, and winter crept in quietly. Emily started decorating the house for the holidays, hanging lights with Leo, baking cookies, and helping the staff turn the living room into a warm, glowing space. It was Leo's first holiday without fear, and she wanted it to be special. Daniel watched them often, smiling as he saw how natural everything felt. He no longer saw Emily as an employee. She was family now. Sometimes he caught himself thinking about what life had been before she came. Quiet, busy, but lonely. She had filled the house with something he hadn't realized he was missing: peace. On the evening of the first snow, Daniel invited Emily and Leo to join him by the fireplace. The snowflakes fell softly outside the wide windows, covering the garden in white. Leo sat on the floor drawing while Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he asked after a moment. Emily looked into the fire. "Sometimes," she said honestly. "Not because it was good, but because it was simple. I didn't have much, but I didn't expect much either. Now I have people I care about, and that scares me more." He studied her face for a moment. "Why does it scare you?" "Because losing people hurts more than losing things," she said quietly. "I learned that a long time ago." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand that better than you think." There was a silence after that, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like 2 people sitting with the truth, unafraid of it. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew in the small moments. The way Daniel looked for her opinion on simple things. The way Emily smiled whenever he and Leo laughed together. The shared dinners that stretched late into the night. Neither of them talked about what was changing between them, but both could feel it quietly growing, like something fragile and real. On New Year's Eve, Daniel arranged a small dinner at the estate. Only a few close friends came, and Emily helped organize everything. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that made her look graceful and calm. Throughout the evening, Daniel couldn't help glancing her way, noticing how easily she made everyone comfortable, how she laughed softly with the staff, how she carried herself with kindness that didn't need to be shown off. Later that night, after the guests had left and Leo was asleep, Daniel walked out to the terrace. Emily was already there, wrapped in a shawl, watching the sky filled with quiet fireworks from nearby homes. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft. He nodded, standing beside her. "Yes, but I think what's happening here is even more beautiful." She turned to him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. Us. This life that found us when neither of us was looking for it." Her eyes softened, but she didn't say anything. The world around them was quiet except for the faint sound of fireworks. Daniel took a small step closer. "I used to think gratitude was about saying thank you," he said. "But now I think it's about living differently." "Because of you, I'm living differently." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. "You don't owe me anything, Daniel." He shook his head. "This isn't about owing. It's about recognizing what's real." He reached into his pocket and took out a small pendant. "Leo and I made this for you," he said with a smile. "He wanted to give you something that would remind you of us." She opened the tiny box. It was a simple silver heart, small and delicate. Inside it, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "Our Guardian." Her eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to," he interrupted softly. "We wanted to." That night, as she lay in bed, Emily held the pendant in her hand. It wasn't the gift itself that touched her. It was the feeling behind it. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as someone who needed help, but as someone who gave meaning to others' lives. The next morning, she found Leo running toward her in the garden, his small boots crunching in the snow. "You saw your gift?" he shouted, his face full of excitement. "I did," she said, kneeling to his level. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever gotten." He giggled and hugged her tightly. "Daddy said you saved us, but I think you saved yourself too." She froze for a second, then smiled, hugging him back. Children, she thought, always saw the truth first. Time continued to pass, and soon the anniversary of the accident arrived. Daniel invited Emily and Leo to the small park near the road where it had happened. The car had long been taken away, the ground repaired, but the memory still lingered. They brought flowers, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Standing there, Emily felt the wind on her face, cold but comforting. Daniel stood beside her, holding Leo's hand. "I came here once after it all happened," Daniel said quietly. "I thought this place would always remind me of fear. But now when I look at it, I see the moment my life began again." Emily looked at him, then at the boy beside them, smiling shyly at the flowers he was placing on the ground. "Maybe that's what life is," she said softly. "A series of endings that turn into beginnings." Daniel turned toward her, his eyes full of quiet emotion. "You didn't just rescue my son that day," he said. "You rescued me too." Her eyes glistened and she whispered, "Maybe we rescued each other." They stood there for a long moment, the three of them together, surrounded by the soft wind and the whisper of trees. It wasn't a story about luck or destiny. It was about people finding each other when they needed it most. About kindness turning strangers into family. As they walked back toward the car, Leo reached up and grabbed both their hands. "Can we go home now?" he asked with a bright smile. Daniel looked at Emily and she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "Let's go home." And for the first time in a long time, that word, home, felt exactly right.